Hey everyone, welcome to the Unhandled Exception podcast. I'm Dan Clark and this is episode number 49. And today we are going to be talking about cake. So I believe things like chocolate cake, carrot cake, vanilla cupcakes, banana cake with cream cheese maybe, I don't know. So here today to tell us all about these delicious types of food is Mattias Karlsson. So welcome to the show, Mattias.
Thank you. Good to be your chef here today.
I've got that right, haven't I? We're going to be talking about that kind of cake.
Yeah, obviously, because we have in our business things like chocolatey and things, but take from food. Now we're going to be talking about DevOps cake in this case.
Now I'm thinking like I've got nougat,
yeah.
Lots of food references. So could you introduce yourselves to listeners and tell us a bit about what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Mattias Karlsson. I come from Gothenburg, Sweden, and I've been working professionally as a developer for over 20 years. And today I'm an architect and a partner at a company called VCom here in Sweden. I'm also a Microsoft Azure MVP, Microsoft Developer Technology MVP, and also very active in the .NET open source space. Well, I maintain something like 36 projects or something, but I'm most well known for two, which is Cake and one called LitJason. And I'm also on the .NET Foundation Board of Directors and under that .NET Foundation Maintainer Committee. I'm one of the chairs there. So, and also have a couple of user groups, DevOps user group and a .NET user group here in Gothenburg that I maintain. Yeah, well, many things I do.
Wow. So did you say you're maintaining 36 projects?
Something like that. I stopped counting. It's various active. Some you just create to scratch an itch and they're out there and you maintain them. And some are like more successful or it all depends.
Awesome. So obviously we're going to be talking about one of those projects today, Cake. But before we do, I'm just going to do this episode's listener mention. And this one goes to Adam Storr, who tweeted out, check out Dan's podcast. Interesting topics, great guests, top work from Dan. It's come such a long way in such a short time. Can't wait to see where it goes. So thank you, Adam. Very kind of you to say so. I'm also very interested to see where it goes too. But it certainly won't be going away anywhere, that's for sure. Although I do actually need to manage my balance now because my New Year's resolution this year was to start a YouTube channel. And I've just done my first video, which was about Windows Terminal, NeoVim, and Oh My Posh. And the channel's going to be about .NET, Azure, Kubernetes, Docker, Git, Vim, all that kind of stuff. So I'll link to that in the show notes if anyone's interested, but I'll be aiming for short, like kind of 10-minute videos. So if you want to get mentioned on the show like Adam, just send a tweet using hashtag unhandledexception. All feedback is greatly appreciated. And I am Dracan on Twitter, which is DRACAN. And don't forget the podcast now has its own Slack channel. If you head over to the website unhandledexceptionpodcast.com, you'll see a shiny Slack link there. And lastly, a quick reminder that this podcast is sponsored by Everstack, which is my own company providing software development and consultation services. For more information, visit everstack.com. Right, Cake. So I guess we should actually step back for the listeners that have never heard of Cake. Can we define what Cake actually is and does? I know you mentioned DevOps before.
Well, it's such a low, like you can't just say DevOps because there is no DevOps tool. That's just something like that would call debate because there isn't. But what Cake is a build orchestration tool, and it will help you orchestrate the tasks you do in your like build and release process of your software or services or whatever. And it's been around now since 2014, so it's fairly mature. It's on version 3, but don't let that fool you because we have done hundreds of releases. But the major thing has been there where each version is that we have aligned with major changes in .NET ecosystem. So with the 1.0, it was .NET Core. With 2.0, it was the whole new .NET 5 and 6. And now with 3.0, we are on .NET 7.
Yeah, with the versioning. So I used Cake quite a bit many years ago, but I must confess I've not used it recently. But I remember, when was it? It was about 2 years ago or something. I saw an announcement saying that it had hit version 1. And I was like, hang on, I'd been using this for years. How come it's only hit 1? But now I've just checked and it's now hit version 3. So that's quite cool.
Yeah. So it's like before it was so much changed in the platform. So we had to change a lot because we predate .NET Core. So we have been cross-platform since before .NET Core existed. So we ran on Mono and .NET Framework before that. And with 1.0, we started with the tool, the .NET tooling part, with the whole .NET CLI and SDK part, and that means like we had that, and each major version we could drop more things. Like we dropped Mono with 2.0 because that wasn't like a big factor anymore. And with 3.0 now we target .NET 7 and .NET 6. And that doesn't mean you can't build for other things. You can. It's just how the tool is distributed. So you need either the .NET 6 CLI or SDK or the .NET 7 ASK. You can still build .NET Framework applications with it. So it's just that to be able to maintain less and have something sanity, because we were very, in the beginning with the O dot versions, we were very compatible with everything, and that's a maintaining burden. To target both .NET Core, Mono, and .NET Framework was quite a burden, and it didn't bring much to the table because most CA agents had the .NET CLI on there nowadays, which simplified a lot. But so that's, and we, with each major version, we also took the step to clean up things that were obsolete, and because when you've been around, many people don't remember, but with Mono, they didn't have MS build, but I had X build, and all those things we could clean out now by then. So that's often something you do with a major. We have minor versions to additives to try to be compatible with that. So that's the versioning scheme. So now we more try to focus with, a new .NET version comes out each November, and then we try to at least rev a major, so we always support. So the last major versions of .NET, we ever had support for it on the same day as .NET was released.
Yeah, that must really help that .NET is doing pre-releases throughout the year and is quite open source and everything.
Yeah, and that's a big difference, because now with .NET since 5, with the RC 1 and 2, with RC 2 you have go live support, so you can test in production, which is a big improvement versus before. And they don't break much, but at least sometimes we notice bugs because we have so extensive many tools and test the change. But there's been a lot has improved since 3.1, I'd say. It's become a much more mature and stable SDK since 3.1.
Yeah, that's cool. So what you were saying about, even if you're building a .NET Framework application, because Cake scripts are C#, does that mean in your actual scripts themselves, you'll still be getting the very latest language features and all that kind of thing, even though you're building a .NET Framework application?
Exactly, because the scripts will either run on .NET 6 with C# 10 or with .NET 7 with C# 11. So that depends a lot. So if you have .NET 7 installed and you installed the tool, and it's good to point out there's two versions of Cake. There's the scripting part, which is the global tool. There's also Cake Frosting, which is you can do a regular console application. It depends on your needs. So if you do the frosting route, you will use a full-blown Visual Studio solution with a project file and everything, and you get the full IntelliSense and everything like that. If you use the Cake tool, you instead just have like a build.cake file, and that will be your scripting part. And for that, you will at the moment need to use Visual Studio Code to get full IntelliSense and debugging and refactoring and things like that. But that's supported in Visual Studio Code. We have an extension for that. But it's also a philosophy thing, because if you need something more advanced, then Cake has something called addons, which essentially are NuGet packages. If you want to do something that's either specific for your company or for a specific tool, then you can do that as an add-in, which is just an .NET assembly you pack up. So I rather try to keep my build scripts lean, and so you don't have to scroll miles and miles to read them. And then, like, if something's more advanced, then I create a method for that, which can be fully tested and things like that. So that you choose your path, like philosophy.
So is there an add-on and an extension? Are they the same thing, or are they different?
Now, like, we call it add-ins, and add-ins are just .NET assemblies that you fetch from NuGet.org. Extensions are just like we have for VSCode. We have an extension that will bring things like, if you want to add an add-in from NuGet, we will add it with a syntax, because as you don't have a project file, it's more like the new minimal console templates where you just have nothing more. Cake has been that since 2014, so it's almost like they copied our lean style of coding in that way. And that means as you don't have a project file, you need to have pre-processed directives, which you have to fetch things from NuGet or to include other scripts and things. And the extension will help you to get that add-in tag, which is a preprocessed directive, and search NuGet. So if you like, there's a add-in for posting messages to Slack called Cake Slack, then you can just do your command palette in VS Code, and it will search out that Cake Slack, and we will insert a preprocessed directive for that. If you go to NuGet.org, you can actually see there's a cake tab on each NuGet package. We can see the syntax for that. But and we also can be extended. You can have several preprocessed directories. One like which is load, which you can fetch external scripts. You can actually create packages of scripts, and that's what we usually call recipes, because that's how so you can answer bundle hops. You can reuse scripts. So that can also be one way to keep your scripts lean, because you can this is kind of thing I always reuse, then you can package that up as a NuGet package and use the load preprocessor directive to fetch that from either NuGet or a local path. So that's how it can be extensible in that way.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, I guess for someone that's new to Cake, I can imagine the first question would be, how does this differ from just using like a PowerShell or Bash shell script? And I guess the stuff you're talking about where you've got these, I can go into say extensions, these add-ons where you can plug in things like, you mentioned the Slack thing or Git version or whatever the extra functionality that other people have already done. We can just hook into those things and use them. I guess that becomes very powerful.
Yeah, so the biggest difference versus like PowerShell is that you write C# instead of PowerShell. So that's one thing. And you get the full everything like string concatenation and interpolation and those nice things. And also Cake adds something like a task graph, which just means you can also create like, you can just type C# straight in, but generally you want to have a certain order of things to execute. And then that's where there Cake has a concept of tasks, which is essentially you can declare, I want before we do anything, we want to clean, then we want to restore our dependencies, then we want to build our code, or we want to test our code hopefully, and then we want to package it up. And that can be 5 different tasks. And then you can declare dependencies between them. So you can set like before I build, I want to clean, and then Cake will automatically do it in the right order, regardless of how they're declared in the file. And you can also do conditionals. You can do like, I will only want to, for example, if you bring out the Cake Git add-in, you will have full support for checking which branch you're on or things like that. But also a lot of things built in. We have like a GitHub provider. We have providers for Azure DevOps, AppBayer, TeamCity, and then you can check, am I a pull request? And I don't want to push a NuGet if I'm a pull request. Then you can have a conditional on the push task, for example. So it will help you a lot of things. And we also like have things like life cycles. You can have things happen before you build executes. You can have a setup task. You can also have a teardown task, which means that I will always clean up after. If the script if something doesn't build or the test fails, it will still clean up in the teardown task. And we can also have a teardown before task and after task also. So you can have a life cycle to make as complicated as you want.
Are there any tooling, so if you got a really complicated dependency graph, is there any tooling to visualize that in kind of like a visualization?
Yeah, so actually if you have the Cake tool, there are command lines to output. So you can actually do a dry run. So it will output what it would have done if it executed. You can also print out the tasks and the descriptions before executed. So that you can do in the tool itself. So that's just a command line option.
Thinking about other benefits as well. So I do quite a bit at the moment in Azure DevOps, which is using the YAML syntax, and there's the different tasks, which is probably conceptually similar kind of thing to Cake tasks. But the problem is with this is that for me to run that, I've got to push it and send it to Azure DevOps and wait for Azure DevOps build agent to pick it up and wait for it to test it. So as I'm developing, the developer lifecycle there, my developer loop is just, it takes ages because I can't test locally, where I guess with this, as you said, if it can run against Azure DevOps, GitHub Actions, all this kind of stuff, and I can run it locally, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's like the feedback cycle is you have fewer grab coffee moments, which is better for your stomach.
I've not heard that before. I like it though.
But I mean, usually, like, because as you say, usually the DevOps, like the life cycle you do is like, I edit some YAML and hopefully I get all the spaces in the right places and I commit it and I'm waiting for a build agent to pick it up and then it starts. If you're lucky, it fails fast. If you're unlucky, it will go through several tasks and then it will fail because it didn't find a path or something nefarious like that. And that's, I think, one thing you say it can run locally is a big benefit. But also Cake has its own IO abstraction layer built in. So it will actually normalize paths, which is a big, like, did I get a backslash on Windows or a / on Unix system? That's something that Cake automatically brings to the table. So it will normalize paths. And that's a big benefit because I have so many builds that fail because things are in the wrong place. But also you get things like all the nice things with working with files. So we have several things built in. So for most things, you don't need add-ins because there's so many things built in. And a big feature is like we have a really good GitHub provider. And when you do things like I want to create an artifact for each operating system, it's really easy in C# to do a string concatenation to name something based on x86 or whatever. But to do that, do a loop in YAML or name something is really hard. So essentially your YAML will just describe your environment, which is essentially kick off a Cake script on these operating systems. So it's reduced to something you rarely touch, but you can test everything else locally. And you have support for, like with GitHub Actions, we have support for both uploading and downloading artifacts. You can upload test results and things like that. And we have the same for Azure DevOps, where you can upload artifacts within your script. And that means it's so much easier because you don't lose context. One thing in the YAML file, like between each task, you almost reset your context between them. But also can do things like you can choose which task you start with because you can have an argument for I start with this task. You can also, one real nice thing with Cake when debugging is you can run a task exclusively. So you can say, like, I just want to test this task with, I know the state is correct because it failed when I ran locally. So I can say, I will start from here. And that's also something that's really hard on when you send to a CI pipeline. So just the developer feedback loop, I think, is a big improvement there. And also it's nice because it's, what I like by the scripting experience is like, because then you have a Cake file that's versioned and you can just look at it. It's not complex in that case. But you also, like, if you have something more complex, you can go the frosting route where you have a full vicious studio solution, or you can use the rider or whatever to. But I usually think, like, if I have that kind of complexity, I try to do it externally because usually the flow isn't that complex for most. It's more like a certain task can be complex, and then I can write that in its own library. And then I can use it in other .NET solutions or other CI providers.
You're selling this too well because I feel like I now need to convert all my projects over to using it. Because I used it years ago and I don't know why I stopped. But all these pain points, we're talking about the developer lifecycle. And I don't want to think about how many hours I've lost, or days or weeks, I should say, to just that cycle of having to, why isn't this working? I've got to push it, wait for the build agent to pick it up, wait for Azure DevOps to do its thing. And as you say, it might be a space missing in YAML or something silly. And just to be able to do this locally, I'm actually just looking at the website now and looking through your add-ons. Although it does actually say extensions, so I think that's where I got the name from. But there's 305, and if you're saying lots already built in, but I'm just looking through, so there's Active Directory, there's Apple stuff, Hotwire stuff. I'm reading out the A's because there's that many. There's stuff at AWS, Asana, Azure Boards. There's just so much functionality where you just don't have to reinvent the wheel when you're doing this stuff.
It also, like, it all depends. I mean, for some projects, your whole pipeline is just .NET Back and nothing more. Well, then it's fine. But often, if it becomes more complex, then you will learn to fight the complexity. And one thing, like if you look something like Azure DevOps or Azure Pipelines have templates. The problem there is, like, there's no way to test them without kicking off a build. And it has really advanced things with Azure Pipelines where you can do loops and things like that. But it's very abstract, and you have to go through like the process of committing something, but also a risk with it, because if you have something external, like if you don't pin your versions, you have to recommit things, and it's So I think that's a big win. But I mean, you should always, if you have a really simple build, then you might not need it. It all depends. Like if your process works, I don't get any money for this because it's a free open source project. So for me, sometimes adopters are just more work. But I mean, in a way, like you should always like if your team is struggling, try something. And there's several like possibilities what you can do. There's tools to auto-generate YAML, or there's tools to whatever. But I think you should at least investigate if there's something for your team. And if you're a .NET team and you already have skills in C# and .NET, then it can be a really good thing a familiar way to reuse the skills you get. I mean, and today it is with Docker containers, and that's one thing which can be really nice. Like for some projects and some clients, we built both Windows and Linux Docker containers. And the problem there is like in a Docker file, using the command shell on the Windows and you use the bash shell, and you don't realize that, but things then are different, like how you create or copy files or everything. And if you have a kick script, then it will be similar. And that means if you're running in a container, or if you're running in your local host, or if you're running on a Windows server, or if you're running on a GitHub build agent, your script can still be the same. And you can just have a couple of conditionals saying like, if I'm running on this system, do this. If I'm running this system, this. And you can still test the logic locally, which is often like, oh, I missed a thing. And at least you will get, well, if it compiles, you have the first unit test, so to say, like your script compiles, because it's not the scripting in that way, because it's still compiled C#, and it's still just some, you get everything you get with C#. You just have to be adding some code generation before the script executes to do things for dependencies and things like that. But it's still just, and that's what you will see if like you go to the frosting part, you will recognize the API because it's just .NET assemblies underneath that we expose through the scripting part. And it's still rustling, so it's the standard same compiler you use when you do your .NET projects, which means that's why we can have the switch expression, the pattern matching, and everything that you're used to. We have things that you can use pre-processed directories. We just have a few extra to do things like fetch dependencies or scripts or add breakpoints and things like that.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine some of the later syntax, like the pattern matching and expression body members and that kind of stuff, making the task more succinct and being perfect for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's super nice. Like I see some, like we have some, we are cross-compiled, so the same script will run on multiple agents. And because we have an API where you can get things like which operating system I'm running on and which version of .NET I'm running on and things like that. And then I can just do a simple switch expression which can do a pattern matching over that. And I can see like, well, then the artifact will name this, and to do that, you can do really advanced formatting like things in YAML, but you don't know what they will be before you send them up, and you don't even then know what they will be until you have an artifact. And if they fail, you have no idea why they failed. You can't set a breakpoint, or you can't do. It's really hard to say what will be. But if you almost know intuitively, like if I do this in C#, I know what it will output, and that's the problem with. There's no standard YAML. So if you, like me, do multiple, like I'm both on like TeamCity or Appe or Bash pipelines, Bitbucket pipelines and all that, then the YAML is different for each provider. So there's no consistency there. But whereas with Cake, you have a consistent API regardless of build provider, which is also a big benefit. So if you're a consultant working on multiple, I want something that I can give a build script, which is really easy for my client to get something up and building. The only thing they need in a YAML is to do like, well, they define it like it's an Ubuntu machine or a Windows machine and kick off this Cake script. That's essentially what they will need to add. That's a big benefit that because and it will run the same on multiple operators. They will save you so much time in debugging and things like that. So that's, I think, the big thing. And I mean, there's a lot of extensions, or as add-ins is a directive, so that's why I call it add-ins. But there's the most things you need are built in. So we have full MS Build support, .NET support, MS Test, XUnit, NUnit, NuGet, or whatever. So I think for most builds, what's built in is a great start. And as a C#, you can also create your script, create your own methods and things like that too. So you can often work around things. And one thing that I really like is you can really easily share state between tasks, which is really hard in a YAML. So you can actually pass like a C# record or something like that between tasks and have that as your data object. So sometimes you like want, I would like to list all files here and then pass that. Or my MS build settings, often is that you will use the same MS build settings between build and pack and test or something like that. Then it's really easy to reuse that, but you have to copy paste if you're in the YAML, and that's error prone. I say to have the I extraction, we will always quote things, like if you call the .NET CLI, your path will be quoted. It's so easy to forget that in a YAML file, like, oh, there was a space in that path, and you didn't know it because that was a build variable or things like that. So that will be taken care of for you. And that's, I think, a big benefit. Like 9 times out of 10, it will just work. If it works locally, it will just work on your CI. If there's something that doesn't work, then it's CI specific. And that's quite nice to know that there's something in that environment that I can troubleshoot there. So that's, I think, the biggest benefit. And also, I think one benefit is that there's a lot of knowledge. And like currently and it was quite fun, just a couple of weeks ago, we became the #1 tool on NuGet downloaded. So, I mean, I think it's like 33 million downloads or something like that now. And so it's been tested. And the project started by Patrick Svensson in 2014. So it's been adding slowly and been really like careful and maintaining it. And it's more like, it's not the big bangs. It's more like we add a little also time and it's really barrel test. And I think that's a big bang for this sets because there's a lot of knowledge shared in the tool itself.
I'm just looking at the list of add-ons now, and some of the things like Entity Framework, so things like being able to update databases and add the migrations and all that kind of stuff just built in. Docker, so I use Docker quite heavily, so just having a standard way of doing that, which presumably is like local and just works in the same way locally, which is quite cool.
And also, like, there are also, like, you don't need, I mean, like the add-ins are really easy because they just give you essentially an extension method to do what you want, simply wrapped. But there are also built-in things you can shell out to any process. So it's really easy to start any tool. So even if it's not supported or even as extension, it's really easy to create your own method just within your build script. So they're actually so Cake's currently distributed, like the tool is both on NuGet. And so we're frosting as a library is on NuGet, but the tool is also available on Docker Hub. So we have, for all the official .NET images, we also have a Cake image where it's baked in. And to do that, we're actually using a Cake script to build for those targets. So we actually do almost like a parallel build with all those things. And that's so easy because to go, well, we can just call the Docker Hub REST API and get all the tags from, which is really like, how would I do that in a YAML file to just be able to? So what we do is like we inventory all, what are the tags available for .NET 7 SDK images? What's the tags available for the .NET 7? And then build a matrix within our build script and build that out. To do that in YAML, then I will probably do something like code generation and do a commit, but it's really nice to be able to just do C# and do an HTTP client to call out. And we don't use any add-ins actually, because I just wrapped the Docker or for me, I'm a Podman, or Podman exe, which is kind of nice. So I just do, Cake has built-in tool resolution too, which is really nice. We actually can find tools, so either in your path or in known path, so we know where MS Build can be, or we know where .NET CLI can be, or if we don't know like where MS Build is, we have support for VSWare, which is a .NET tool which you can download to find Visual Studio. So this has a lot of built-in tool resolution. So really nice. Like for me, like it's like, do I have Docker exe or it's just Docker on a POSIX machine, or do I have Podman or Podman exe, and then I can just find that and have the same because the CLI is the same. So actually, that script supports. Doesn't use any extensions because it's just essentially Docker build and Docker tag. So sometimes like you don't need them, but it's nice. It'll if I want something ready-made, it can be really nice with extensions. Things like, well, I can call out the REST service, but it's nice to have an extension for Teams or Slack or Gitter, because I don't want to know how that JSON message is. I just want to be able to say, send message to this channel with this token. So that's really nice to have a red extension. But for some things, like if you just shell out to a util, it might be useful with an extension, but it could also be like, for my process, I know what I'm going to execute. Then I can just have a tool, support for a tool like just an alias to execute any tool. And also the built-in, you can start any process and things like that.
Yeah, I guess like taking that Slack example, just doing it yourself. It might be, I don't know, half a day to a day. Doing this might be 30 seconds. So it's,
yeah,
it's like
that's not it. Like that's not the important part of your business. Like it's
exactly. Yeah,
that's something like you either add it or not. Like, or it's ready made, and I can just use that. And you can do things like it's easy to have during life cycle if you want to do something different on each provider or something like that. So that's a good example of that is Cake itself. I think I build it currently on 12 CI systems and something like 6 or 7 operating systems, each commit that someone sends a pull request for. And that's using the same script. So itself is like we test it just by doing it itself. So if someone sends a pull request, we will actually build and run and test Cake, but we'll also build Cake itself with the binary that's generated. So from the artifacts that's generated from the pull request, we'll also try our own build script to do just fully do an integration test. So that's quite nice to be able to test that. But I mean, it would be really hard if we had to do something from each provider. Now it's just each provider is the environment, and we just describe the environment in their format or file or configuration tool.
Yeah. Speaking of Slack, looking through the list of extensions, I've just seen cake.hipchat. I forgot that even existed. Is that still a thing?
I don't know, but I mean, and that's different. Like some extensions are probably considered, what you say, in open source done. Like if someone's using it, it's there. You have to check yourself if it's actively maintained because there are so many. But the most common ones are, and that you can see on NuGet what they're built against and everything. And that's something like we try to have very few breaking changes. But if we are in a breaking changes to the core, there will be a warning, and you can opt out to if you want to continue or not. But I think it's really, you have to consider like if this use case and sometimes like an add-in could be created to solve a very specific problem. So I mean, if it's useful for you or not, it depends. And I mean, if you just need one method in an extension, it could be that you can just write that yourself in your script. Because I mean, every dependency could be a potential burden. You have to take it. I mean, if it's great, like a Slack, I wouldn't write my own Slack integration or a Microsoft Teams integration. Well, I wrote those add-ins, but I wouldn't write it for each build.
I know what you mean. Just looking through the list again, and there's quite a few that reference pull requests, like there's a pull request one for Azure DevOps and various things. How does this integrate with pull requests?
So, like built-in Cake has a series of build providers built in, and I don't know all of them, but there are things like Bitrise built in. We have Bitbucket pipelines, Azure DevOps, AppAir. What the extensions could be that they add specific things, and that could be there are some that's called Cake issues, which is a series where like they will add automatic information to your build logs and things like that, and analyze test things and do for each provider. So that's so it could be something very just like if you used like OpenCover or something like that. That could be that the add-ins adds more than you want to know. Like it will add annotate builds and things like that. It could be things like that. But after the box, you will have things like upload artifacts, download artifacts. You will have upload test results often. You will have a Boolean for am I running on this CI or not? That's built in. So I can check, am I running on Azure pipelines or am I running on GitHub Actions? That's something that's built in. But it can be things like we don't have Azure board support, but that can be something like, well, if I need Azure board support, that's in an extension because that's a more niche thing. That's not something everyone wants.
Yeah, that makes sense. So going back to the tooling, you mentioned there's the other kind of extension for VSCode. Is the plans to actually do that for other things, like, for example, I don't know, Vim or whatever different editors there are?
So they have an extension for Visual Studio and for Rider. The problem there is it's really hard to integrate with Visual Studio currently with that kind of thing. So we don't have full IntelliSense support in Visual Studio. You have it if you use Cake Frosted because that's just a regular console application, but for Cake scripts. So if you use Visual Studio, you will just get syntax highlighting. You will get things like the task runner, we show up the tasks that's available in the script, things like that. So if you want the full-blown things, it's currently Visual Studio Code that will give everything from IntelliSense to debugging to everything. You can still debug the scripts in Visual Studio, you just have to manually attach to the process, essentially. So you can start Cake with an --debug. It will wait for something to attach, just like if you're on Azure function, like a func host start, you can just do a Cake build and then you can attach, and then we will just be able to single step plug anything because it's just the PDBs and everything are generated for the scripts. So it's just C#. It's just like as its code generates, Visual Studio isn't aware of the generated code, which we have through the OmniSharp projects. We have extended OmniSharp to know about Cake. So it will know about the generated code. That's for the global available things.
That makes sense. I was just about to ask a really stupid question then. I was going to say, does it support other .NET languages? And then I remembered, that's what the C in Cake stands for.
Yeah, so if you're like an F# user, there's the excellent Fake project, which is essentially the same thing but F#. I mean, and I actually did, so as the Cake core is just a .NET assembly, and also the Cake common, which is called with all the tools, are just two .NET assemblies. And I did a blog post a couple of years ago where I just demonstrated. I actually did a bake, which was actually a Visual Basic variant. So I mean, so you can actually do if you wanted to. So I have, if you want to use Cake outside of Cake, I actually done a project called Cake Bridge, which will fill the gaps for you what needed. So I have. One is just Cake Bridge, which is just a proof of concept, which I did by blog posts. But there's also a Cake Bridge dependency injection, which you can use the regular Micros dependency injection to get the cake types. Because I like the whole IO abstraction and things. So I actually use this in a couple of tools. But I usually combine it with something like if I do a console application and I want some IO operations, then Cake has some built-in globber and things like that. Then I can do something like combine Spectre console with Cake and do I will just do my thing. So that's something like you can use the Cake dependency action for. So that will give you the build. Well, essentially we just new up the objects that you will need for, because it's just .NET objects underneath. It's nothing magical in that sense. So that's like the one option. But other languages, like I have actually, it is .NET. So I have some old samples where I actually did F# with the help of a friend. But I mean, it's not a supported offer tooling. And if you want like F#, then Fake is your way to go. It's an excellent product, very mature. They predate us.
Yeah. I kind of, as soon as I started thinking about that question, I suddenly thought, oh yeah, of course there is Fake, and there's all these different Ake tools.
Yeah. I mean, it all depends on your how complex you want. Like for many things, many builds aren't that complex. You usually you want to clean and you want to restore and you want to build something and create artifacts, and that's it. But if you have some more, GitHub uses Cake Frosting for their OctoKit.NET client. So frosting was more suited for them because it's more like, instead of doing a script, you're more doing like an ASP.NET application, is the API feel of that. So you get the full thing. So if you're doing something really advanced, then it's nice to have the full Visual Studio or Rider or whatever you want to use for that. But also I like to keep my scripts as simple as possible. And if I want something that's testable and extendable, then I'll do a .NET assembly for that, where I have that in its own module. And that can be also segue to modules are actually something you can extend your scripts with, and that's just a .NET assembly, but they can replace internals of Cake. So we have a module directive where you can fetch from NuGet, and it can be things like, not as common now, but before when we ran on .NET, the framework, the regular Windows .NET didn't support long paths in the beginning. Then you can have something like a module that replaced the internals for a file system Cake provides. But also can be more common today. It could be things like logging. So we have there's a build system provider module that will automatically add things to build log and will fold tasks in the build log and things like that, which some provide. Like Travis has support for that. GitHub Actions has support for folding. So actually creating a subtask within the build log when it renders. So that's something that can be something like you use the module for to extend something.
Is there any way, and I think I know the answer to this, but say for example, I'm running my CI/CD ones on Azure DevOps, where if I'm not using something like Cake, I get different tasks in the UI appearing of each, the restore, the build, the publish, or whatever. Presumably, if I'm using Cake, the entire Cake execution pipeline would just be in one step in the UI in Azure DevOps.
Yeah, but that's also so both, if you look something like Azure Pipelines and GitHub Actions, they support console commands, and Cake actually has wrappers around those. So you could do something that annotates that this is the beginning of a task and end of a task, and then that will be something visible in the build log. And it can also be things that you add to so it will be visible in the summary of Azure DevOps. So that's a certain possibility. And also Cake has support to, if you use something like OpenCover, you can upload those to Azure pipelines, and then it will be visible in the task summary of Azure DevOps. And that's also something that I find really nice. Like usually when you do, you don't want sometimes everything. You might want everything in step, but you want to execute it differently because you have different environments, like I have a dev, test, or production, something like that. And then what I usually do in that case is that I put the Cake script as part of my artifact. So it will be, along with my artifact that's produced for something like deploy a website, I will have either my build Cake or a deploy.cake, and that will be executed when it downloads the artifact. So I will have that version, so I will know exactly how that artifact was deployed, and I have the environment control where it's deployed. And that's something that's, I think, really, that's hard with Azure YAML, because like, how do I monitor that? But if I have an artifact, then I can download that for UI and watch the script. Well, this was what I was trying to execute for that with these arguments. And that's a big thing. And I don't need the whole, well, then I don't need the whole SDK. I just need .NET installed and execute, you do a .NET. Well, essentially, like if you have used the tool part of Cake, you just do, well, I think it was with .2.1, the tool support come in .NET SDK, and which means that you can either have them installed globally on your machine, or what I usually do is you can do .NET new tool manifest in your repository. And then you will get the tool manifest. We can have all your .NET tools versioned with your repository. You commit that file to your so you have it committed with your code, and when you start on the CI or another developer's machine, they will just do .NET tool restore, and it will fetch all those tools with exact versions that are pinned to that. So you know, when I built, if we use dot version of those old tools, so essentially the process in a CI will be, or a colleague's computer will just be, I will clone out the repository, I will do a .NET tool restore, and I will do .NET Cake. And that will take care of everything, all the dependencies or everything that I needed. And that's quite nice. And which means you don't need, we have, for historic regions, we have extensions for many CIs, but you actually don't, usually just the script task will suffice. We have something that, like for GitHub Actions, we have a task which makes things very much easier because it will take care of, there are some built-in secrets with GitHub Actions, and it will take care of also. So we have a very seamless experience. So we're able to upload, which is sometimes hard to do with options to, like, how do I upload artifacts? How do I find where things are? Well, if you're in the Cake script, I know that I will create it to that folder because I have a reference to that C# that file path. So I mentioned we have an IO exploitation. So we actually have, this is a file path, this is directory path, and we have all like our aliases, which is what we call the tools we wrapped, take the strongly typed objects. So I know that this command expects a file, and this command expects a folder. And that's something you usually don't know by, if you just look at the CLI help. It says path. Okay, what's the YAML path? Is it the file? Sometimes it's both, and that's sometimes with YAML the problem because it's very flexible. So you sometimes don't know what it expects. And if you look at Azure pipelines, there's so many generations. So if you look at tasks, there's aliases for the same thing. So I think it's really nice that we have an expression, like a strongly typed thing. They automatically convert from strings. You can just do a string, but if you have the correct type, you know what to expect. And we have things which is also complex. We can, like, I will combine this directory path with a file path, and it will sort things out for you, how to combine them correctly and quote them and things like that. That's also something that really saves time, I think, with that thing. And just things like we have built-in globber support, so you can get all files recursively with this things are built in, but also for cleaning directories. Like I want to clean all directories that has this name or so that's something that, and the good thing is that you can test that both locally and on the CI, then you have confidence that it will work. Because that's something like, it's so easy, like it works on my machine because your state is in a certain state. If you always have a script that will go through the whole process, it will clean and create a good state, and it will build, then you have confidence that it will work on your colleague's machine or the build agent, or if you use some cloud service like on an IDE or something. So that's really nice. And good thing like working good Visual Code is that all the things like GitHub has now their hosted VSCode. There's also things like Gitpod and other services. Those will work with Cake scripts too.
Yeah, I do like what you mentioned about the typed thing. And with the VS Code extension, if you actually, as you're working, if you get the IntelliSense based on the types and any linting errors, so if something's not working, as you're typing the code, you can actually see that it's not right.
Yeah, so if you install the extension, you will get that. Then you get full IntelliSense just as you used to in MS C# project. And then you will see things, and that's something that makes it very discoverable, because often with YAML, you'll have to essentially try it to see what it does, or you have to find a good blog post that someone tried it so it does. So if you just can do all the control space or whatever you use to get the IntelliSense up, then it's that's a good discoverability help for you as a developer. But also, if you have a script, it's really easy to just copy paste it, and you know that everything that's in one, just like a YAML file, everything is in one place. I don't have to run around to see how it builds and things like that.
I like what you said before about new developers as well, or the different developers. Where that's one thing I like about Docker, where a new developer can come in, do Docker Compose up, and everything spins up. With this, if a new developer comes in and can git clone, then build the cake build script, and it just works. I think again, it's just yet another time saving on onboarding and things.
Yeah, and I think it's also it's important that you should be able to just clone out and open the solution and build in Rider or Visual Studio also. So I think that's sometimes a problem with some, when you had the old make script, something that needed to run the make script to be able to build it. I think it's good architecture to be able to do both, but sometimes you have, we will fetch these. It could be if you have a website, you need to fetch build some NPM packages to, or you need to. And all that can be good to have a recipe that writes down the steps, because that can be a real time saver if someone wants to know, you need to do, first we have this, whatever, we had that before, if they had some Gulp thing 10 years ago, so we have the NPM or React build or whatever you have. Often things are polyglots, and if you're a .NET developer, it's nice to have that in one place.
Yes. So just think about the different kind of projects now then. You've got desktop apps, mobile apps, web apps, APIs, IoT stuff, all sorts of different types of projects nowadays. Presumably, because you said it was just MS Build, that kind of thing, it doesn't matter what you're building, you can just build literally anything with it.
Yeah, so Cake itself is an orchestration tool, so it doesn't replace your C# project files or anything. You still use so it doesn't augment anything there, or it will shell out the tools. What it will do, it will shell out to them in a consistent way and a safe way. And I think that's the big things, the big advantage there. So if we just use either for most part, people use the .NET CLI today, which is the .NET EXE. But there are certain kind of projects where you, if you're using something like a UWP app, or if you use something with a WinUI, that you might need to use the MS Build, the Visual Studio, then we support that too. If you .NET will just shell out to its version of MS Build, so it's very similar to if you use the other. So you can still reuse how you clean, how you build, how you restore. It's just the difference between that, how you restore.
Yeah, very cool. I think so. As I said before, you definitely sold me on this now. But are there any big areas that we've not covered that it's worth calling out?
Well, I think take it for a spin and take for a call to action. But if you choose any tool, it's important that you get the whole team on it, so you don't command it in. And also, you should always evaluate if there's something that you actually need. I think, because if the only thing you do is a .NET Pack and .NET Push, it might not be needed. But that's usually how you start. And if projects evolve over time, and you have to set these MS Build projects, and then how do I escape them? And then it's nice to have an extraction layer over it. But it's always important to just not. I've seen someone if it doesn't solve a problem for you, I won't say you have to use it, but it sometimes simplifies. We have some interns now that started with YAML because I wanted them to learn YAML, and then you have to almost have your hand on a plate and get burned to see the benefits, because sometimes you this Azure DevOps template, if I change that, I broke everything. And there's no indication that you broke everything until you run a build, because a build can be multi-stage and everything. And that's often the real-time thing. I see it worked in dev, it worked in staging, and failed in production. At least you can test that locally, all those steps, and you can test it with all those parameters that you usually have, because usually it's just the difference in an ideal world, the artifact should be same in each environment, and there's just parameters that change. And then so that you can test locally too. Just change the parameters of your, and that's a good thing. Like, how do you set parameters? Well, you can use the general thing with CI. Usually, environment variables is, and even if you use Docker files, you can set environment variables. But you can also Cake has support for arguments. You can pass arguments to it, won't console arguments. But I see the general way to pass things are through environment variables, because that's how, like, if you GitHub Actions or anything, that's how they can pass secrets and things like that. But also there are built-in things, so you have support for, we will fetch up the build token from GitHub Actions automatically, so you can do things. And that's something like you don't have to pass around that token everywhere, because Cake will know about it.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. Cool. So I'm kind of like aware of the time. So I think we've covered everything we said we're going to say. So shall we move on to dev tips?
I think that's a good thing.
Sounds good. Would you like to go first?
I can go first. So my dev tip is, well, at time of this recording, the latest version of Spectre Console was just released. And I know you have talked to Patrick before about it, but I just wanted to push because, I mean, now they just added more things like to visualize the JSON. And so that project is, I think I'm really impressed about what they have achieved. And it's like beautiful console applications. I'm come from the Linux space or Unix space in the beginning, so I really love that we can do beautiful console applications in .NET too. So I just want to push that they pushed a new version and they add even more nice features to it. That's my dev, and that's my go-to if I do any new console applications. I have on NuGet I have my devlead console template, which is good. Like I use Microsoft dependency action and I use Spectre Console. That's like before I start line code, that's what I include in my console applications.
Awesome. I can definitely echo that because it is absolutely amazing. And yeah, I'd recommend anyone to go back and check out. I can't remember what episode it was, but I'll link to it in the show notes anyway, both Spectre Console and the podcast episode. But yeah, fantastic tool. And to raise awareness of that project, it's just tell your friends, tell your colleagues, tell everyone about it. It's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, even if you after you come to Spectre Console to use just a tiny part, like I want to create a figlet or something, and then like, oh, it has tables and there's more, and like, oh, it can make my exceptions print pretty to the log, and there's so many lovely things, and it's a really thoughtful API, which I really like. Yeah.
I think the thing is, it's kind of the documentation is so good that it's, whilst you listed out all those things and it sounds like, oh, that's lots of feature scope. Actually, you can. It's so quick to look through the documentation, think, oh, that looks interesting, copy and paste that snippet into your console app and just use it straight away. I did a talk at .NET Docs for the user group I run. It was a virtual one and it was recorded. And Patrick was actually going to do basically a talk on Spectre Console, but he had to pull out at the last minute, sadly. So I decided rather than cancelling the talk, I would just take his place, but wing it and just get the documentation up, create a new project, and just play with the different components. And that went really well. So I'll link in the show notes to that as well. But the documentation's that good, we could just play around with it.
It's really good, and they're really good work with the whole, like, even if you look at the social previews of the documentation. So like, I think there is a gold standard of an open source .NET project, how documentation should look. And I can also ping back to Cake, but actually we ship Spectre Console with Cake, so you will be able to use that within as a default in your build scripts if you want to output a figlet or something in your build script.
Oh, nice. I like it.
It's built in, and also like things like visualize dependencies or something like that in a nice table or something. Yeah, so that's built in Cake.
Oh, that's so cool. I'm gonna go away and play with that later. So my dev tip, and I normally wouldn't do something like this where I'm kind of like suggesting going, well, I don't know the best way of saying what I'm trying to say, but basically recently I've upgraded to the YouTube Premium, and I wouldn't normally do this as a dev tip, but it has completely changed a lot of the way I learn, because I hadn't really appreciated how annoying the ads were, kind of like and how much the ads stopped me from consuming anywhere near as much content, as in learning stuff, that I do now. And I'm finding since I did the trial and I've switched to YouTube Premium, and I'm finding I'm learning so much more about lots of different things, about like development, about I've mentioned in the last episode about my back issues, about like learning about how all that kind of stuff works, just everything. I started the YouTube channels, I've been learning about content creation, and there's no way I would have learned anywhere near as much if I hadn't switched over to YouTube Premium. So as I say, I wouldn't normally do a dev tip like this, but I would suggest doing the trial, because for me it's been almost life-changing really, which seems a bit over the top, but it kind of, yeah.
And you don't get the dialogue, like you want to try to just skipping, like not getting that dialogue anymore, asking you if you want to try premium. It's
exactly.
That's very disruptive.
But there's extras. I don't mean to be on a marketing thing, because it's kind of like, well, but I quite often listen to YouTube videos like a podcast, where if someone's just talking, you don't need to see them, but on the premium you can turn it off and put it in your pocket without it actually going off. You've got YouTube Music and various things like that. So I've just found it being really beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good advice. Although, like, if you appreciate a service, there's no shame in paying for it. I think there's so many like that want everything for free, but I mean, if it adds value, then you like clearly invest in it. So, I mean, and if it doesn't add value, don't subscribe. It's that easy. You don't need to be. And I think that's like the important thing. Like, we should always play our strengths and not. It's so easy. Like, I'm switching from this to this. Like, just it's better to say why you're switching to something, and then people can make up their own mind or whatever. So I think it's. I mean, if it adds value, paying for something isn't bad. It adds value. And often what we developers don't have is time. So actually by not watching the video, like the ads anymore, you have actually given yourself more time. And that's money too. So yeah, I'm a real podcast junkie, and like I use Pocket Casts, and it's quite interesting to see because I have variable speed. So I listen, it's really hard to like, you're really slow in reality sometimes when you meet some, especially the American podcasters, if you ever meet them in person. But that has saved me days just by able to have trim silence. And I mean, you don't have them as silence, but it's clearly that you edit by hand or do a really good job there. But many podcasts don't do that. They have, and it's quite nice to see how much that tool. So that's something I actually pay for too. That's that app, and just the ability to that saved me time. So I mean, having good tools, just like having good share or a good keyboard or anything else, it's worth something. It's worth to take to employer or something to say, like, if this makes me more productive, it can be worth it. It's not like if it's $100 million, then it's worth it. But if it's sometimes $7, you can skip a latte that month, and you can choose. Sometimes the problem is like if all these patrons things can be also like it adds up. If you see your streaming, just like you see your streaming services, like now I have $7 everywhere. But I mean, if it really provides value, I think it's a good tip.
Exactly. If you're investing in yourself and you're paying a bit, but then you're getting big long-term investment or long-term value, then yeah, definitely worth it. Cool. So, Cake, where's the best place for us? Presumably cakebuild.net, I guess. That's the best place to just learn everything. Yeah.
So cakebuild.net is our website. We're also cakebuild on GitHub. So that's cake-build on GitHub. But everything you can find on cakebuild.net. So that's, I think, a good starting point. And if there's anything, we have GitHub discussions. So you can just raise a discussion if you have any questions or anything like that. And if you find any bugs or want to add a few feature crutch, so you can just add a GitHub issue. And if you you're happy to take pull requests, if there's anything, your tool or a new feature or anything like that, that's a good way to start. Or our documentation is also open source. You can submit pull requests to if you want to. If something's unclear in documentation, you can say it with code to make us better. So, I mean, cakebuild.net is a good starting point.
Magic. And I'll include links to all this stuff in the show notes as well. Cool. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been really good chatting with you about the food cake.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's always nice to... I'm a bit hungry. I'll have some coffee now. I need some of all this cake talk.
Yeah, I wasn't until you said that. Now I'm hungry.
Lovely.
Awesome. And thank you everyone for listening. And a quick reminder that this podcast is sponsored by Everstack, which is my own company providing software development and consultation services. For more information, visit everstack.com. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please do help me spread the word on social media. I normally use the hashtag unhandledexception, and I can be found on Twitter @Drakon, and my DMs are open. And my blog, danclark.com, has links to all my social stuff too. And as I mentioned before, we'll include links to all the things we mentioned today in the show notes, which can be found on unhandledexceptionpodcast.com.